My name is Czerniak, and I am one of the co-presidents of the European Forum of LGBTI plus Christian groups. The European Forum is an organization that has been active in the area of Christian queer activism for over 40 years in Europe, and for more than 10 years now it's also been doing different types of activities in the Orthodox domain in the region. And I personally am an Orthodox Christian. I was born and raised in Moscow, Russia, and for 13 years I've been living in Poland. And I've joined the European Forum some 12 years ago in particular also to be involved in this Orthodox-related work. And it's my honor and pleasure to be the host of this panel. And our panel's title is From Friendly to Welcoming to Affirming: How Can Orthodox Communities Be Inclusive for LGBTI plus persons? And let us welcome our wonderful panelists today. I'll start with short introductions. On furthest side away from me is Father Jerry and Helene Hall from the United States. A few words about them. So they've been together for, it says, for 44 years. Impressive. Wow. So their path towards this, and I think they'll be sharing about this later, was because of the coming out of your son. But it's not in every family that the coming out is leading to the parents being so involved. This wonderful couple has been leading the conversations around acceptance and LGBTI person inclusions in the Orthodox Church in the United States for the last years, with the support of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocesan Center for Family Life. They've been hosting presentations and discussions and online spaces for pushing this conversation forward and providing safe space for other families with LGBTI persons in the Orthodox Church to network and support each other, and observing this space personally for me was a blessing. So welcome, Father Jerry and Helene. Now, next to Helene is Marie Mars, also from the United States. She's a certified therapist and clinician, sex therapist and counselor and educator, and she is been focusing on the issues of trauma and emotion-focused therapy. And Marie is, we met some 6 years probably ago, and Marie is an amazing storyteller, and she will be telling stories which sometimes will shake you to the bone and sometimes will uplift you. The stories that she has observed in her practice as a therapist and a counselor are immensely important for this conversation. And next to Marie is Lyoshka Gerassimenko from Estonia. Lyoshka is my colleague in the European Forum of LGBTI plus Christian groups in the Orthodoxy domain there. But also Lyoshka is also a therapist and counselor and also doing sex education. And Lyoshka has been co-leading with me and many other people the work, for example, publishing of this book, which we'll probably refer a little bit later to as well. So we wanted also to be joined by one of our colleagues from Greece, but unfortunately, to various complicated issues, he has had to withdraw his participation. We just wanted to acknowledge that the conversation is difficult, the context in which we operate is difficult. There are many other political and sensitive issues, and sometimes these conversations are not going forward as easily, as smoothly as we would like them to, but we appreciate the fact that we can have this space with you to discuss this forward. So we will now, I'll go back to the panelists to ask a series of questions, and then we will leave some 30 minutes, hopefully at the end, for our joint discussion here. So please remember your questions or comments. We really would like this to be not just a top-down instruction session, but more of a conversation and something to come out of it for the good of all of us and for the good of our fellow people in our communities and our fellow queer people and our allies, and for the benefit of all in the church and in society. Probably enough for the introduction from me. So my first question to all of you, as a continuation of our introduction, in a way, is how and why are you here, basically? So why the conversation around the inclusion of LGBTI plus people in our Orthodox parishes is important to you. And I have absolutely no order in my mind, so whoever wants to go first, please do so.
Of course. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. And it's really our honor to be here, share some of our thoughts and our stories with you this morning. So I start with really a confession, and that is that I wish I could say that I had been always an advocate for LGBTQ people, but that's not the case. This has been definitely a process for me. As Misza mentioned, our son came out a number of years ago, 20 years ago, and that started us on a journey, which really, when we started that journey, I didn't think I wanted to take that journey, but having spent these last 20 years in that journey, I can't see myself anywhere else, and so I'm really thankful for the product, even though the process has not always been easy. When our son came out, I think we felt like we were affirming. We told him that we loved him and that he would always be our son, of course. But we ask a lot of difficult questions that I know, now after learning what we've learned, that we realize that those were not necessarily so affirming or helpful, and could have been, hurtful. As a pastor, as a priest, I served for 34 years before I just retired recently. Again, I felt like I was being compassionate and open to people earlier on in my ministry. But again, after having the experience that I've had, I've been able to look back and know that some of the things that I was asking them to do were not affirming to them and were making things difficult for them. Some of this came from the fact that I was a convert to Orthodoxy and really wanted to follow the rules, and so that is part of my personality. So some of this change was difficult for me, but the change really came as we continued to have our son in our life and began to, as he became more assured with himself, and we had an opportunity to meet his community and his friends and listen to their stories and understand their struggles and pains, and also just see the integrity and the beauty of their lives and living their lives authentically. Again, it made a change for us, realizing that they are not different from us. They were us, and they're part of our family. They're part of so many families, and church communities, and so that began to make a change for us. And then I realized after a while, and we were feeling very affirming and involved with the gay community through our son, but I realized that I needed to come out too. And so probably 10 years ago, I was a speaker at a national clergy retreat, and I talked to 250 clergy brothers and began to talk to them about our situation, our family. And that opened the door to an amazing journey. I learned and met so many priests who had their own stories to tell, and that opened the door to so many calls and opportunities for conversations. And so all of that has never stopped. And so we've had other opportunities to begin to speak, and I've used this opportunities to speak to my brother clergy, to talk to them about their own need to be affirming, to learn from some of the mistakes that I made along the way. And so I'm going to continue to offer this message for openness and affirming behavior by clergy, by lay people, especially in the Orthodox Church, but for all of us. And so that's why this is a personal message for me.
Just to give you a little history as well. So when Father Jerry graduated seminary back in the 80s, 1988, we were swept up in kind of the beginnings of the heavily marketed and very political Christian movement that was circulating, sort of the evangelical Christian mindset. And so this mindset, as everyone's familiar, promotes heavy traditionalism and almost like a bubble theory, like raise your kids in a bubble, protect them from all the evils of the outside world. And the literature that I read and the radio that I listened to was extremely homophobic and fear-inducing and had an agenda to condemn outside influences. And so, in this environment, when our son finally, through his own very strong, inner strength and resolve, came into his own as a young adult and showed us the true picture of what a gay person looks like and acts like. And not only did I feel immense remorse and shame for my former thinking, but I also felt like scales had fallen off my eyes. And I thought back over all the years of the wrong thinking that I was following, and I vowed to never look back. And it started to sink into me that up until this point in my life, I had never really, truly seen unconditional love in action not this way. The vulnerability, the compassion for one another, the support of one another, all this was modeled in the gay community to both each other and to us. And this was a new kind of love that I wanted to be part of. And through our new connections with the gay community, I felt like I could finally see the world for what it really was. And for me, it was a brand new view, a world of love, compassion, and hope.
Doing the switcheroo. So I think my journey to this work had several parts to it, but I think I'll highlight two. So I went to the seminary and did my undergraduate at the seminary, and then afterward, when we moved to Atlanta, my husband, Father Christos, and I began working for the church as the youth director for our metropolis. And when we did our summer camp every year, our kids were continually asking the same kinds of questions every week of every year. And one of the big ones was, what do we do if we're gay? If we are in some way, somewhere along the LGBT spectrum, if we are anywhere outside the box, or someone we know and love is, what do we do with that? And I was fortunate enough to not have to answer this question. But unfortunately, what that meant was that I didn't think a whole lot about it. I just sort of sat back and watched. So that was the first part of that journey for me. The second part was that, well, there were a lot in between, but the second major part of that was that I left that job and became a therapist. And in the first semester of my graduate school program, I was taking a class that was taught by a formerly Catholic professor. And in that class, in one particular class session, there was a young woman, a colleague of mine, who went on and on and on, and I don't even remember how the conversation started, but she just went off on this sort of tirade about LGBT people and how the Bible says this and the Bible says that, and I was just looking at her. I remember she was sitting back behind me, and I just looked at her like, what are you talking about? What is this? This doesn't even have anything to do with the topic of conversation, and it was just horrifying to me and so upsetting, and I kept thinking, I can't be associated with this. This is just no way. And after the class, I went up to the professor to turn in, the work that we were doing, and she started talking to me. She knew I was married to a Greek Orthodox priest, and she asked me, what does your church say about this? What does your just public exposure, humiliation type trauma that is difficult for people to heal an inner split from. So the way that trauma frequently presents for people, there are a couple of books that I often recommend for people to understand the neurology behind. One of them everybody tends to know of, which is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And the other one is What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It's actually also a very good book that explains a lot about the neurology. But the way it tends to present is things like extreme shame and things like depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations, attempts, and completions, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, nightmares, hypervigilance, dissociation, isolation, confusion, seeking therapy to change sexual orientation, ostracization from community, considerable shifts in core identity, purpose and sense of order, loss of potential afterlife rewards, and incapability to integrate sexual, cultural, and religious identities into a complete sense of self, and extreme existential aloneness and loneliness, which studies have often found is a greater predictor of early death than smoking or obesity or excessive drinking. And I think it's also important to note that studies are showing us that seeking help from religious and spiritual leaders is actually correlated with higher rates of suicide attempts following that help in LGBT people. Results of one particular study showed that participants who sought help from religious and spiritual leaders had higher rates of suicidal ideations and attempts following that the contact that they had with those leaders. So I think those are probably the big highlights. The things that was a lot of information I just kind of threw out there.
Yeah, when I said we want to look into the abyss, into the depth, that is deep. I mean, that is the real harm. Maybe we can, Helene, Father Jerry, you can continue with some of the examples and stories you have.
So I read an article the other day, and the title of the article was "The Day My Church Canceled Me." And even though the topic was regarding racism in the church, the title stuck with me, and I realized how appropriate it felt to me as a gay ally. I have definitely felt many times like my church has wanted and still wants to cancel me. As far as harm in the church, I feel like a couple things happen. One, the closeted gay person hides under a persona that allows them to fit in, to portray what a church member is quote unquote supposed to look like, which is everything against the grain and so many lies and a complete denial of self. And then the layers start piling on for them of falsehood, shame, and deception. And then the family members act in the same pattern of falsehood. And so it can grow in this negative direction for a very long time, but then at some point, the tipping point hits and something happens in our life when suddenly we're not willing to accept living as fake. And we're not willing to accept not being seen and heard. And we come to realize that we're authentic, and this goes for the families as well. If we support and undergird and celebrate gayness, then in the church, this action has a reaction, and you can bet it will attract the most rule-following, punishment-loving parishioner. And this dynamic is coming from the fact that everyone wants to create a feeling of safety and protection for their loved ones, and none more so than the rule-following parishioner who is now a self-appointed guardian of the church. But unfortunately, if one is deemed themselves a so-called guardian of the church, so they're quoting scripture and church canons and surrounding themselves with people who are also trying to cleanse and purge, and the safety net is turned inside out, and now no one is safe. So we are othered, and in our minds, they are othered. We are seen as less than. We are seen as a threat. We are seen as possessing a mindset that's resolute on destroying the social order of the church. And then families start to split and take sides. Lifelong friends turn their backs, and spiritual destruction can make its way into all the parties.
So last Sunday in the Orthodox calendar was the Sunday of Pentecost, the descent of the Holy Spirit. And the work of the Holy Spirit is really to be a uniter, uniting us with God, uniting us with one another. There's a phrase in Latin called solo Christianos, no los Christianos, which means, one Christian is not a Christian at all. So you cannot be a Christian by yourself. We need each other. And so, in the area of harm, I think the major harm that's done to the LGBTQ community is really opposition to the work of the Holy Spirit, where we see, as we've just talked about, is this rejection, which is division and loneliness. And so I think we have to think about the fact and realize that LGBTQ persons are not, many of them aren't knocking on the door of the church. Many of them have left, unfortunately. And I keep saying to people who are in the church, don't leave, because we need your voice. You need to be here and stay, and even though we're asking a difficult thing sometimes, but people are not knocking on the doors of the church simply out of principle, of looking for just a place to facilitate and to ask for change for the sake of changing, but they're really expressing a desire for God and faith, and they're asking for their spiritual home to nourish them. And instead, we have given them outdated, hypocritical rules in Scripture out of context, and tell them that this is how it has been and always will be. This is especially hurtful when done under the guise of love. We welcome them with the ulterior motive disguised as acceptance, and only later to seek to convince someone to change and conform, which is sort of what Mari was saying as well. Or we apply this don't ask, don't tell, just be quiet and stick around, but God forbid, don't be yourself. Again, so harmful and damaging. And so due to all these different forms of rejection, many people are leaving. Sadly, they give up something that has been really a sustaining force in their lives, but has become such a source of pain that it's not really worth it. And then, unfortunately, some of those in the church breathe a sigh of relief since they no longer have to deal with a gay person. But we really, really should grieve this loss of those who were seeking God, who were seeking spiritual food, and we would not and could not feed them. So loss and isolation that is caused by these attitudes of silence or hostility create an environment where LGBTQ folks believe that neither family nor church is a safe place to acknowledge their authentic person. Many people have spent so many, years alone, praying, hoping, because of these attitudes, hoping and praying to change something unchanging in themselves, because of fear of rejection and shame externally placed upon them. Yet this something was part of the very fabric of their being, something worth celebrating and accepting, not hiding in shame. People have shared with me their pain of living long lives, and I've, as I said, I'm a retired priest, so I've had the opportunity to see people who have, come and gone, and people are living their whole lives with very few, if any, others who supported them, accepted them, or even acknowledged the truth of who they were. And so I've had people simply nearly on their deathbed wanting to know if they were going to be okay in the next life, because of this is how they've lived their lives, and have rarely talked about it. And I feel like what a privilege it was for me to be there and to tell them that God has loved them and always loved them and will always love them. They're stories of those who have moved far from their home or left their family altogether because of rejection, which is real or imagined, and fear. So today, since we know these dynamics and are aware of the harms caused and the risk for the LGBTQ community, especially the youth, and especially those who are disenfranchised from family and community, we have such an important obligation to offer love, compassion, pastoral care, and just to listen. We're called to act appropriately with compassion and support, welcoming people into our church communities to facilitate healing and acceptance. And I want to leave you with one quote from Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, who's a famous Orthodox theologian of blessed memory. He said, "In the past, Orthodox have usually been reluctant to discuss such matters as gender and sexual identity. But the questions cannot be avoided. Silence is not an answer. Let us listen to one another with creative courage, with mutual respect. Let us acknowledge, moreover, the variety of paths that God calls us as human beings to follow."
Thank you. I so much want to strengthen all that you have said. And maybe also, in a way, to question some of the things. Because when I think about those safe priests, which are a blessing to the community, I also think how hard it is to be a safe priest, how dangerous it can be to be a safe priest, and how you can feel alone in the system and struggle with being alone in the system. And it's definitely like this in the Eastern Europe, where I mostly work with people. And for people in Eastern Europe who want to heal, who want to hold their integrity, for LGBTI people, not just for them, but also for families, for allies. And if we add up families, allies, and friends, it's a remarkable part of society. That is a thought that has given me, the mother of a gay person who is now trapped in Russia. She said, it's so many of us, it's not just LGBTIs, it's so many of us who are affected. And for many of those people, the path of healing is a path away from the church. I have seen amazing healing stories. I have seen amazing stories of change with homophobic and transphobic people who have tried to fire a safe priest and then have done the same things that the safe priest is doing. And when I told about it, to the priest said, yes, I know, this person has brought her books to the church, saying she's leaving the church. She's welcoming now, she's affirming now, and she has left the Orthodox Church. And it shouldn't be this way. And if we kind of take a perspective, then living church on the way of healing does harm also to the people who love God, who love Christianity, who love Orthodoxy, and who very often dismiss their path of healing in a way, telling that I'm not a member of church, I'm not Christian anymore. And when I ask them what values are still important for them, and they talk to me about those values being put into action in their relationship lives, in their helping people, in helping the younger generation who says to them, oh, we didn't have suicidal ideation because we had you. They do not acknowledge that this is Christianity put to action, this is Orthodoxy put to action so often. And at the same time, my colleagues who are working with people who are abusing, who are like domestic abuse or domestic violence perpetrators, they say to me, it's very hard to work with domestic abuse perpetrators who regularly go to the confession because they do not think, they just dismiss their actions. They just confess and confess and confess again without going deeply into this. And in a way, when a church loses equality, when the church loses its values, in one group of the people, it loses so many. It is not possible to just dismiss one group of the people. And we can see it with the climate fight. We can see it with the refugee crisis. We do not often see Orthodox Church at the forefront of those movements, of the climate movement, of the refugee movement. And when we do, when we see Those people, lay people, clergy people, it is very hard for them and they feel alone in the system. So that is also what is happening in the big picture.
Thank you. And then maybe I will just add one more thing from my own personal story, not as a moderator, but as a panelist. A short story about the harm is also from the pressure that you mentioned, and from all the lies and everything. There is also harm caused in the what's called now conversion therapy, conversion practices, or reparative practices. The idea that an LGBT person has to pray the gay away, as it was said many years ago. It's my story, 13 years of my life, and also that also included heterosexual marriage and becoming a father. And the idea that there's something intrinsically wrong with you, and God will not love you unless you conform, and unless you squeeze yourself into that frame which is not natural to you, not scientifically, not spiritually, not in any way natural to you, and not something that God is actually calling you to, is harmful to the person, but also harmful to those around. Because there is a huge group of former spouses, of heterosexual spouses of LGBT people, who either knew before they got married to the person or didn't know. That doesn't matter, but the harm there, and to the children, is also a huge, sin of the church. Because that's something that, one could argue that the cross of the LGBT person is their own cross, but there's a whole group of people who suffer from this without having been in any way responsible for this. And I'm not saying that I'm not supporting the notion of this as a cross. That's not what I meant. I'm just saying that there's a whole additional layer of people that are being hurt. And this is my story, and healing of all of that takes a lot of time and a lot of strength, and also a lot of personal autonomy in relations with God and with the church, and shifting the focus from, in our Orthodox church, we quite often have this authority framework that the church knows how to do things and you have to conform. There's much less independence or your own autonomy in decision making when you're in the Orthodox church, unfortunately, compared to other denominations. And the healing quite often requires oneself to make hard decisions, and that's what Lyoshka is talking about some people healing, moving out. I'm not out of the Orthodox Church, but I had to also redefine a lot of how I see myself as an Orthodox person after I realized I will not be fighting myself as a gay person, but I still love God, and I want to be in the communion of other God-loving people in the Orthodox Church. So redefinition of things is also a path that we have to embark upon quite often, and that is also a challenge because the Orthodox Church doesn't like reforms or redefinitions. And I think that I'm moving into the next part of our conversation is about the shifts and the changes, and we know, we all have experienced that there is a pushback, that it's a difficult path to change. But I think in the popular way today, let's affirm the changes that we want to see. Let's talk about a little bit of these glimpses of hope, these positive examples of what was possible in those harsh realities that we operate in. There are things that can be done and can be achieved, and let us maybe share those examples, because I definitely know that in the room we have people from different places where such examples are needed and would be helpful and maybe would contribute to someone's, and I'm not saying necessarily in this room, but some out there, some healing and some integrity and someone's mental health out there, because the world needs those signs of openness and examples. So, Lyoshka, do you want to start the first this time?
Something that I think is we often see the church as some force, but it is a deception. It is us who are the church, it is us who are the society, it is us who are Christianity. And it's not easy, maybe, to see. It's not easy to decide what to do in some concrete situations. When we are happy with the things going, or we are not happy with the things going around us, what can we do? During pandemics, when people in the Orthodox world were saying we are left without the communion, I shrugged my shoulders, because we were gathering online, we were sharing communion, believing God shares the communion and Eucharist between us in the way that only God can do in the circumstances we were in. And we had done it before, just 2 or 3 of us gathering together, breaking the bread, pouring the wine, believing that God will take care of the theological content, but we are together in the name of Christ, and that is what matters. Standing in the church where communion was denied to some people, it wasn't even allowed to talk about this denial of communion before or even after the service, not speaking during the service. I told to a friend who was standing next to me, and who was crying, I told him, when we go to communion, it's our place. We can do whatever we want at this place. And we went out and we said, it breaks our heart not to take the communion, but let's use this time to pray for the people who are denied communion here and elsewhere. And we were ready for a very bad outcome, but the priest asked us, what are the names of the people that we are praying for? And it was a very good experience in the end. I was once with a small group that was going around Estonia, and we had a Russian mother of a gay son with us. And when we were going into the churches, she said, oh, it's so sad our children are not welcome here. And then she went and took the church guest book, and she wrote in it that I'm a mother of a gay son, and I hope so much one day our children will be welcome here. And those are just small steps, but steps that we can do whenever our heart tells us to do something in the church, outside the church, wherever. So this is, for me, kind of this good practice. Okay, what can I do now? Maybe I'm afraid. Maybe I do not feel safe. Maybe I do not know what to do. And maybe this only step that I can do is just to talk to other people about what is going on. But those small steps, they create a change in church. And I really wish that we talk about those small steps. We do not dismiss steps that may seem insignificant.
So I think I have to speak to what I know and speak to the corner that I live in specifically. It would be, I think, inappropriate of me to speak to the churches that are outside of my realm of knowledge. That would be outside of my scope of competence, I think. So my little niche, my little area that I know is in particular the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. And I happen to know a lot of clergy, happen to know a lot of people in my little area of the world. So I think I speak best to what we can do. And I think that the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America can move some pretty big mountains. I think we have the ability to do that. So the things that I think I would like to see happen are in that particular corner of the world. Because I think if we can make some steps in that corner of the world, we can make some steps globally, because we have the ability to do that. So I think along those lines, there are a lot of things that we can do today right where we are. We have some big conversations going on about things like same-sex marriage and stuff like that, that are long-term conversations that take a long time. We all know the Orthodox Church does not move quickly on anything. So while those conversations are going on, there are things that we can be doing right now. And I think it's important to focus on a lot of those. So one of the things that I think is most important to see is that we are looking inward first and foremost. I think we can't do anything to make any kind of difference in our parishes, and by we, by the way, I mean allies in the church, and the parishes themselves, and our clergy especially, need to be looking inward first. In my professional background, there is something very specific that we have to do as sex therapists, certified sex therapists, which, by the way, that term is a large umbrella term for people who work specifically with populations that are highly specialized in the areas of intimacy, in marginalized populations, and we have to do what's called a sexuality attitudes reassessment, or a SAR. And what we do is we watch videos around specific topics like touch, or like intimacy in specific populations. And then we process those videos. We process what we've seen. We process what our individual feelings are and our individual experiences are. And we process them in a group privately, and we talk about them so that we can have our experiences and feelings be known, and have almost therapy around those feelings, so that as professionals, when our clients come in and tell us about experiences in those realms, we're not sitting there thinking about our own feelings and thinking about our own experiences, and they don't get in the way when we're trying to help and facilitate our clients' processing. I would love to see something like that happen in our parishes, so that our clergy and our people are processing their own stuff, and so that they are familiar with what's happening inside them, and it doesn't get in the way of the work that needs to be done in our parishes. Because I think that a lot of what's happening is that our people's fear is getting in the way. We're not seeing our LGBT brothers and sisters for who they are as human beings. We're seeing them, as I said before, just reduced down to sexual behavior. Why are we talking about the things people do in their bedroom? It's just ridiculous. And what it says to me is that people aren't looking at their own stuff. They're not processing what's happening inside them. So I really think that that is the absolute first thing that has to be done. And I think we can even do that in a formalized way if we have people in parishes who are willing to step up and take the steps of making some sort of a program or something like that. So that's the first thing. I think once that is established and working, then we need to go find our people. We need to go find our queer people and bring them back. And we can't do that until our spaces are safe. They're not going to be safe until we figured our stuff out. Then we need to bring our people back. We need to stop talking about people's sex lives. We need to stop talking about what's happening in people's bedrooms. And we need to start administering the sacraments without question, equally, unreservedly. I am very blessed in my corner of the world to have a metropolitan bishop who is humble and loving and just absolutely doesn't even think about things like this, just loves everyone, absolutely loves everyone across the board, and just doesn't talk about people's sex lives. And I am married to someone who is the same way and administers the sacraments equally, lovingly, unreservedly. And I would love to see more clergy doing that. And then I think, again, we need to be a space that is safe and caring and there for edification. I think we need to stop saying that we're a hospital. Yes, we all know that the church is a hospital for the sick and whatever, but when we say that to people who are LGBT, what we're really doing is our homophobic inner selves are saying that, and quietly, low-key, saying that people who are LGBT are sick and need to be healed. So we need to stop saying that. And then I think we need to be holding each other accountable for the good. So Helene said something earlier about the fact that these people who have appointed themselves the guardians of the church, and there are a lot of them out there, are kind of ruling the day, and they are at the moment, and unfortunately those numbers are getting bigger. I think, especially in the church in America, the people who are there for the good need to be louder in holding those people, the so-called guardians, accountable. Because right now we're too quiet. We are just too quiet. And I'm not speaking about those of us on the stage. So I think we need to be out there doing more. And then I think above and beyond, most importantly, we need to be, number one, praying. And number two, we need to be amplifying the voices of our LGBT folks. Amplifying and giving space to our folks and to speak, to pray, giving them spaces that are just theirs, and standing next to them and not in front of them, assisting, facilitating, hand up, not hand out, and taking concrete actions to do all of that. So that's my little list.
Thanks, Marnie. Okay, so this is, again, about the good practices and change you'd like to see happening everywhere. So first of all, I think, transparency is the key. How can we know ourselves? How can we nurture and feed our own spirituality if we have to do this outside of the church? How can we speak to our spiritual father, our spiritual guide, if we have to hear yes, but? Yet we know we have calling as gay and allied Christians to be brave, to nurture our spirituality, to pray, to solidify our inner strength, to talk privately with God, and then to believe that He is helping us, and also, very importantly, to stay steadfast in the knowledge that we are good, that we are holy beings, that we are loved. And the more that people can be transparent and live authentic lives, the holier the community. Deceit, lies, and dark behavior is part of those who say one thing and do another, and that is not the gay community or the allies. We are not of that mindset. The authenticity of the gay and allies people is one of the most humbling, loving, awesome things to behold, the authenticity of the gay person. Once one is authentic, then one can draw back the curtain of fear. In the church today, we have many, many gay Orthodox Christians and their families. They're still in the closet. They cling to the church, but they have nowhere to turn. They don't know if there is anyone like them or if there is anyone to turn to. None of us needs to hear one more time, well, this is what the church believes. Like, we've never heard or read this before. We need action, we need voices, we need authenticity. We need to ask ourselves, why did God place me here in this time, in this place, and how can I help? And then I just want to share this little vignette with you. So last October, we were blessed to be part of a forum at Fordham University, and the title of the talk was Seeking Harmony and Compassion, Helping Parishes with LGBTQ+ Ministry. So this was a panel discussion followed by a question and answer period and then a prayer service. And so everyone at the talk respectfully left the room and came to this prayer service. And then the priests that were there offered special petitions for the LGBTQ community. And I have to tell you, the feeling in the room was one of wonder and freedom. We could not believe we had a whole room of like-minded Christians praying for the same solution, speaking in a church setting about the gay community and its progress in the church. So after experiencing this event, when I'm asked the question, what do I hope for? I believe the best solution to this is for like-minded, gay-loving Christians to be able to have a safe and celebratory place of worship.
Like Mari mentioned, I have to speak from my own perspective as a Greek Orthodox priest from the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in the United States, and so I think there are some really good and I want to mention a few good things that I think that are happening more recently. The Archbishop of America recently offered a positive statement. One part of his statement, there was an interview that he offered. And he said, discriminating against people based on whom they love is not orthodoxy. So this was and I have some few more comments from the Archbishop. I'll be the photos in a moment. But I think that I personally have been happy with and pleased that Pope Francis has made some of the moves that he's made in being willing to bless couples who may be in a relationship or married outside of the church, and is offering sort of some kind of a doxology or just blessing them. He just recently had an audience with Father James Martin, who's been a great advocate in the Roman Catholic Church and of welcoming the gay and queer community. And he said, he wants him to continue the work that he's doing. There's new authors, there's new theologians, there's publications and conversations. The one of Bridging Voices that has happened in Oxford and Oslo and over the last few years have been, important things. And then Helene mentioned that the Fordham University has had two different conversations in the last year where we've been, openly having these conversations and dialogues. And so these are all important things. That the marriage equality that just was granted here in Greece, another important step. And so, as I said, in my experience as a priest, there are priests and lay people who have shared positive stories of compassionate clergy and communities where gay couples and families are accepted and welcomed as part of the community, where they are participating, celebrating, contributing, thriving. And we have been blessed to hear these firsthand as we have been facilitating these kind of gatherings and conversations. From my first experience at the National Clergy Retreat up to now, one thing really has remained constant. When we have these kind of conversations, when we open the door and try to create a safe environment, we find out that everyone has a story. And many of these stories are filled with a mixture of pain, but there's also some triumph, there's healing, and reconciliation. But almost without exception, the people are so thankful to be in sort of a setting of Christians, a setting within the church environment, sharing their stories that for so long, for so many of them, have remained locked in silence. Because we all want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to be loved and accepted, especially by our families, our loved ones, and our church community. And so there's hope when we can begin to have these kind of opportunities for authenticity in the church. I want to talk about two challenges. There's the fear of change, and there's a lack of communication network for the allies. And so I want to share something from Scripture, an example from Scripture that just came up recently in the church that I thought really sort of, as I'm thinking about preparing myself for today, I was thinking, this is really the sort of the dynamic that happens with us as well. And so a few weeks ago, we talked about the miracle of the man who was born blind and was healed by Jesus by making clay and anointing his eyes, and then he goes and washes, and he's healed. And this is done on a Sunday, which was against the Jewish law. And so this man is then, after he's healed, this miracle has taken place, he's then questioned by the Jewish leaders, by the Pharisees, and they cannot accept his story in any kind of way, and so they want witnesses, and they call his parents, they call other people who knew him, and they said, is this the man? And we see, he now can see he was born blind. Is this really the person? And so they're like having this sort of inquisition, and I think about why is this inquisition happening? And it's really out of fear. It's fear that if they believed that this happened, it would shatter their reality of what they believed about Jesus. It would shake their stability of their faith that was really, in so many ways, stuck and mired in the past. Because one of the things that they said was that we have Moses and the prophets to tell us, to teach us, but not this new Jesus. And so if they would believe that the claim that this blind man was healed by Jesus, it would change everything for them. And they were terrified. They were terrified. And so they would have to face their own unfounded reasons to reject Jesus. And it's that same kind of fear that holds us back now. Fear of rejection, fear of change, fear of truth, fear that some of these fears and behaviors have been like hypocritically institutionalized at many levels in the church and leadership. And it was that fear of change that caused the Pharisees to spurn the man who was healed, calling him a sinner and ignorant. And we still see that happening when we refuse to accept the reality of gay folks in the church who are simply acknowledging and living out the way that they have been created. And then, in terms of this challenge to communication, also relates to this story of the blind man, because there were those who saw the truth of this healing, and for them to stand by this blind man was to acknowledge their authority. This healing would and acknowledge the authenticity of his story would mean for them they would be rejected. They could be thrown out of the synagogue. They could be ostracized, and so they remain silent. They may remain afraid to speak. And we struggle with this dynamic in our conversation in the church. And so these are things that we have to begin to overcome, and we are beginning to overcome them as we can have these kind of conversations, these kind of gatherings. And today we have affirmative pastoral practices that are happening, providing some welcome spaces in many churches. But there are too few opportunities to bring these voices together, to speak and to share, so that we can be a stronger voice that comes together from the grassroots. And really, this is how it's going to change. Not necessarily from the theological work that is important that people are doing, but it's going to happen from pastoral practices that are happening in parishes and we see the positive changes that are being made. I think it's important to remember that we have to also move beyond this being a discussion about choice, because it's about personhood. It's about what's at the core of the LGBTQ person's being. And these people have been with us throughout history. And the treatment that they have endured is rooted in scripture, and tradition has been based on misunderstanding and fear. The prohibitions just don't make sense in the face of what we understand and know via modern science and the experience of human beings in the 21st century. And the question is whether we will continue to hold on to that flawed understanding of the diversity of human sexuality. We've talked a little bit about transition and how we want to hold on to that, and that becomes sort of the guiding principle. And I want to just quote one little sentence from Father George Florowski, again, another giant of theology. And he talks about tradition being not only something from the past, but also the present is important in our tradition, and that's where the future lies also. And he says, therefore, true traditionalism in the church does not preclude development, On the contrary, tradition lives and grows. Consequently, being faithful to tradition does not signify an obstinate fidelity to the church past or even the apostolic past. So it is something that is living, and we have to be bold enough to embrace a discussion and a process of dialogue and discovery that allows members of the Orthodox Church who are LGBTQ persons to openly share their experiences and views that embrace both their sexuality and their Orthodox faith. So the question is, can we listen without the need to argue or debate or change them because it doesn't fit our way of thinking? We need to help facilitate efforts to overcome within the Orthodox Church and other churches and faith communities the current culture that discourages honest self-disclosure about our human sexuality and results in people making decisions that isolate themselves in secrecy. We can do better. Think about what we can learn if we're courageous enough to create an environment for all LGBTQ people and their allies, including clergy and theologians, to speak openly without fear of repercussions. Finally, it's my hope that events like this can highlight the theological scholarship and the pastoral realities that support more inclusion for LGBTQ people in faith in their respective places of worship, and give others the courage to share their support for gay folks in the church and other places of worship. We can find strength in our gathering here to continue to encourage others to speak and to join the conversation and to overcome the past.
Thank you, Father. And sorry for cutting you short. We're almost out of time, and we still want to have this space for conversation. Just wanted to draw your attention to, as part of good practices, that there are a few publications that might be helpful for your work and your context. We have this book published in English and in Russian, which is called For I Am Wonderfully Made. It's a collection of not just personal stories, but also theological papers and roundtable transcripts. So basically, a whole conversation recorded around the topic of inclusion of queer people in the Orthodox Church. Some people here were part of those processes in the past. In English, you can buy it online from Amazon directly. The Russian version can be downloaded for free online. Then one more book that I wanted to mention is actually from the Fordham University, which was mentioned today already a couple of times. It's called Orthodox Tradition and Human Sexuality. This is a purely academic scholarly work, but it's also very well grounded in the understanding of those academic theologians of the reality of queer people in the Orthodox Church. Some of them are themselves queer people. And last but not least, something published in Oslo, a small, very thin brochure. It's called The Orthodox Church and Same-Sex Love, Resources for a Challenging Conversation. And this is a small brochure that comes from the experience of a few parishes on how to engage the parish in this conversation. There are questions for small group discussions or some resources for reading or whatever. So I think this kind of approach can help those communities to go step by step further, to be more safe and also brave. Not just safe as a whispered who's, oh, that parish is safe, we can go there, but actually that these spaces become safer together and create a growingly, largely safe space in the Orthodox Church. And I think I'm done with my part and with our panel part, but we have, well, since we started a little bit late, I think we can go a little bit into the questions. If you can put the slide with our, this is the slide with, if someone wants to use the QR code for the form with questions, but also we can give the mic to you and the floor, and we promise to not record the faces of those speaking.
Hi, I just wanted to thank the panel so much for everything they shared, and I felt there was a lot of very personal stuff in there, and thank you for sharing that in this public forum. It's really incredible. My name's Nick, and I'm a LGBT Orthodox Christian, and my family's from Serbia. I'm a Serbian Orthodox Christian. I wanted to make two points. When we were talking about the sort of problems that queer Orthodox people face, I think one thing that was slightly overlooked was the fact that in countries like Serbia and Russia and Greece to an extent as well, being queer is a massive political issue, and the relationship between queerness and orthodoxy. At EuroPride, 2 EuroPrides ago, when it was in Belgrade, a bishop called for members of the faithful to take up arms and attack EuroPride, and we had massive problems with violence there. And across the Orthodox world, particularly in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, there's just like this unbelievable level of violence that queer people face on a day-to-day basis. I guess my question for the panel is, one thing I've been thinking a lot, especially since Bridging Voices, which was a conference that happened in Oxford about sexuality and gender, is how can we as LGBT Orthodox Christians make sure that our voices are actually going to those most vulnerable people and those people who live in these super violent contexts. One thing I found when I came away from that conference, and something I see when I look at, and it's not necessarily like a criticism, but one thing I sort of wanted more for when I see like what Fordham does or some other LGBT Orthodox affirming events is they all seem very, very academic. They all seem for like this like kind of small circle of people, and I just sometimes I think, but what are we going to do to go outside of that? You know, like I felt with Bridging Voices personally, like some people went there and said some very liberal things, went home and pat themselves on the back, and that was the end of the day for them, you know. And I just wonder what we can do as a community to make sure that for countries like Serbia, Belarus, Ukraine, places where we see this extreme violence, that queer affirming orthodoxy is visible, and what we can do.
To put it very short, I think never will just one intervention work, and to be able to engage people and to be helpful to those people, we need them to join the community. So kind of my short answer to them would be tell those people European Forum of LGBTI Christians exist, and let people from whatever countries join the community who is dealing with the cause and dealing with different topics, advocacy, ecumenical work, orthodoxy work, and so many others. Something that comes to mind.
I would also echo that there are so many different levels on which we have to work. I think academic level is at least important in the way that it takes away the argument that this goes against the Orthodox tradition. It was hugely important for us to hear that the best academic theologians in the Orthodox world actually are, most of them are very liberal on this issue because they have researched their texts and their academic corpus of works from the past, from the fathers and the scriptures, and they found that Orthodox tradition is actually affirmative. Everything that says otherwise is historical layers upon it, politically intertwined, as you mentioned. So, but in the core, the message of Orthodox tradition, in general Christian tradition, but particularly if we're talking about the Orthodox situation, is a very affirmative and inclusive. But that has to be reminded, and that has to be reminded on the level of practices in parishes. It has to be reminded on the level of academic theologians and many other ways. I mean, in the European Forum, we tried also to use the opportunities presented by Orthodox, I would say pan-Orthodox level, on larger levels. So in 2016, when there was a huge council of the Orthodox Church happening on Crete, we published an open letter on behalf of Orthodox LGBT persons. The problem with those initiatives is that it has a high personal cost for people involved, because then you come out on a scale that you are not prepared for. But at the same time, the result is that the words Orthodox and LGBT plus come in the sentence much more often than they used to. And this people start entertaining the idea that actually it's okay, with an exponential growth of that. Something that we didn't imagine 10 years ago is happening, like these panels, these events. So I think every single small stone that you can put into this on all the levels counts. The fact that it becomes normalized, it's important.
Just two comments. One, just to mention another resource that's available by Dr. Bryce Rich called Beyond Gender Essentialism Beyond Male and Female. He does an amazing job of talking about sort of the whole history of how we've looked at gender and sexuality within the Orthodox Church, and so it's well worth reading. And I think my other comment would be to Nick is that I think, just from my own experience, that there are more affirming people and priests that are available, I think, all over the spectrum. I know some that are in Greece that are more affirming, but again, it's just that inability for us to join those voices together that is a challenge for us, and it is so Father Vasilios Thermos, he was, I think you know Father Vasily, he was at one of the Bridging Voices conferences. He's written some things that have been sort of affirmative, and he's willing to at least have the conversation. Willing to have a conversation, I should say, and so we have to be, thankful for those that are willing to at least enter the dialogue in an open way.
I love this question. So thank you for asking it, Nick. I think this is one of the most challenging areas that we face. And I think it's one of the places where we have to really think outside the box. I agree with Lyoshka that this is a place where there isn't one single intervention. I was thinking about this actually the other day. I read an article where the person that wrote it was talking about the fact that Minecraft is being used in the country of China to get messages out because the government can't control it. And the reason it struck me was because my son and I absolutely love to play Minecraft, and we play it all the time. And so it struck me that things like that are ways that we can possibly think outside the box to reach people. It's coming up for me now because this is one of those areas where I think we have to think outside the box. Social media is the first thing that comes up for me, and I also recognize that in countries like Serbia, like Russia, that might not be a great way to go. Video gaming might be a place where something can be helpful. Video gaming might also not be possible in some countries, but it gives us sort of a possible route that we might be able to think about is some of these alternative places. In my training, we like to think about things in different realms, such as mental or psychological, spiritual, emotional, physical, in terms of realms of health. So if we look at those different realms, then we want to be looking for interventions in all of those areas, not just one or the other. So we might be looking at that at sort of video gaming or social media or one of these other places to get messages out. Where do we send people, though, for all of these actual interventions? I think we have to be looking for organizations that can cater to all of these. So for instance, I came across one the other day here in Greece. There is an organization called Milano, which is a nonprofit that was started by a guy here that hooks people up with free counseling, with free mental health sources. And it's all telehealth, and people can just sign up, and therapists can sign up to offer an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours of however much they want to give mental health. So I'm guessing that there are, sources like that all over the place that people don't know about. So, if we can find those sources and get the word out somehow, that's what I think we need to be doing. So I don't know how helpful that is, but those are my thoughts.
Maybe one more,
Thank you.
Mira from Slovakia. I'm Roman Catholic, so a little bit of outsider question, but I was really inspired what Mario was saying, how your personal experience of hearing somebody doing hate preach or something like that forced you to come out. And I'm for the first time in Greece. I went yesterday to the stalls of the organizations at the Pride concerts. There was non-religious related organization. We have speakers from all over the world, but not from Greece. And the question before was that Orthodox countries are really on the how would I say, most negative LGBT side in societies in Europe. And I'm struck that Greece recently had achieved marriage equality. That Greece is really a strong cultural Orthodox country, but I'm surprised that I don't see any organizations, any lay people, anything happening for the inclusion of LGBT people in the Orthodox Church. So my question would be to Mary or to other panelists that how can we bring a country like Greece, which is progressing in legal way and for more equality, but the Church is still opposing, still the force that is against an inclusion, and it looks like the parishioners, the believers, they just accepted it. So how do we encourage them to raise their voices?
I think this is a good question too, and I think it's kind of a universal question. I think in any place in the world, the question is always institutional versus the people. And so what comes up for me is grassroots and hierarchical or clerical clergy. In terms of grassroots, I think the country just passed same-sex marriage. So what comes up for me is the people themselves have to show up. How we do that is another question. In terms of hierarchical or institutional, I actually think that this is where the GOA, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, can be influential. I think if we can make some steps in the American Greek Orthodox Church, then we can have some influence over really the rest of the Orthodox world. Because I think the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America has a lot of power, honestly. And we are leaders in the Orthodox world, more so than we tend to think. So, in some parts of the Orthodox world, but I think we have a lot of influence in the Greek Orthodox world, and when we get that part of the Orthodox world moving, then we can have a lot more influence globally. So,
I just wanted to say that, I've been involved in trying to engage hierarchy in dialogue for a long time, and I'm a little bit wary of those efforts, as you can imagine. But I still believe that there is a role for the hierarchy to play in this. For example, sometimes the role of the hierarchy, with all due respect, is to shut up. I think sometimes if we can convince the bishops to not oppose, to not stir them, and to not, cause people, all of that. There's a good example in the Catholic area of our advocacy in Malta, where the LGBT Christian group, and actually the parents of LGBTs who are predominantly Catholic people in the parishes of Malta. Malta is a relatively small country. They convinced their bishops to meet their children, and after that, the bishops kind of stopped opposing the marriage equality progress by having met the LGBT people and the children of their parishioners. So I think one of the way for the church is to be humble and remember it's part of a multi-convictional, multi-faith landscape. The church, even in Greece, is not, still, it's a predominantly a force and everything, but it's not the only player in the field. And we need to play, fair, we live in a secular world, and the church has to, my opinion, should remember what its purpose is and what its purpose is not. Ruling over the minds of the whole country is not the church's purpose, and has never been, even though there have been, marriages between the church and the state, as always. But so I think if the church agrees to play by the secular world rule book, for example, to honestly process within the church the fact that there's a lot of hate speech coming from within the church, and the church has to work with it inside, on the inside, because church officials quite often like to, be irritated and openly angry about someone else saying bad things about the church. Like hate speech towards the church always is a topic for the church officials, but not when the church officials are saying hateful things to other groups in society. So I think if it's a secular society we live in, there is some things for the institutional side of the church to learn, and I think that creates also a situation where people are, more free.
And a small addition, if we want to encourage people coming out, let's encourage baby steps. I came to my first LGBT Orthodox, LGBT Christian forum out of the closet, literally. My parents put me in the literal closet. And it was a huge step. I was afraid to befriend an LGBT affirming pastor in Estonia. And then for many years I've been telling I'm this closeted activist, and then Misza lovingly said your closet is transparent for quite some time already. But it was safer for me to be transparent and closeted in this way. And I remember that before Misza's very powerful coming out, Misza has been discussing it also for quite some time. So let's encourage baby steps. When people talk to just one person, that counts, and that gives them the inertia to move forward.
Probably our last one, right?
Yeah, because we don't have enough time. The
Okay.
next one is
Okay, so we don't all answer the next question, just one answer.
Thank you. My question, I come from Greece, I'm a Greek Orthodox, and I think that two of the topics that we do have in Greece, in the Greek Orthodox Church in general, is firstly the fact that we have the official church on one hand, the three parts that are the formal Greek Orthodox Church, but we calculate there's about 500,000 Greek people that are Greek Orthodox in a much more extremist way. They do not form part of the formal church, they follow also their own calendar, etc., etc. And those people take up a big part of the narrative of what the Greek Orthodox Church does. Because, for instance, they go to theaters and they block theaters when there's any religious element mentioned. Those people are not from the Church of Greece, Church of Crete, Church of Albania, and the other Greek Orthodox churches in the region. They are their own community. And we know, for instance, they don't even recognize the monasteries in the Holy Mountain, for instance, so they have bad ties with the Ecumenical Patriarch. So I do not know who I can be addressing myself to as an activist or as a Greek Orthodox queer person when half of the hate speech comes from outside the church, people who are trying to control the narrative about what the church looks like. And about the question that was brought up about how Greece is a very Greek Orthodox country, however progressing a lot. I think that a very common narrative that we young Greek people and Greek queer people have is that what the church says and what Jesus said, they do not align. And this is such a common thing that Jesus was much more progressive and inclusive than the narrative of the church per se. And it's the most common phrase that you will hear in Greece, I'm Christian but I don't believe in the church. So we do have this case of church wanting to be involved with politics and like what Jesus said. We have the case of a lot of exclusion while Jesus said love your neighbor, etc., etc. This goes as far as migration policies, tax policies. So I think a big part of the narrative in Greece is actually not about the church but about the religion, how the religion is inclusive and the church isn't. And this is something that we have in Greece also with the priests. So a lot of times the hierarchy and the very formal people of the church, they say terrible things. We're now in Thessaloniki, until recently having probably an incredible far-right extremist as a bishop, who was famous in Greece for what a hateful person he is. And then you go talk to your priest and your priest is lovely. So those are elements that we do have in Greece. I guess that we're not the only case, but we have those particularities.
I would say very quickly to you, I love your point, like speak to your ideal listener and people will listen. So those who want to listen will listen, and if you don't block people out by their belonging to this or other structure, they will listen.
Thank you so much. We had one slide with the details of the organization if you want to reach out. We would be happy to, so if you reach to us through our contact phones or anything, or just grab us during this conference here and exchange contacts, we'll be happy to further network with you, because we want to build these connections that Father Jerry mentioned earlier, that we need to network for people not to feel isolated, and for people to also work together, because if we show that this is a thing happening not just in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of the United States, but also in Serbia and Finland and Estonia and Ukraine and everywhere else, Romania, Cyprus, I think this gives additional layer to the conversation that this is a global thing and unstoppable thing, to be honest. Thank you so much for my wonderful panelists. I know we didn't have enough time to say everything we wanted, but I'm very happy for this, for the things that have been said. It inspires me personally as an activist, as an LGBT person of faith as well, and I hope this was helpful for you, for your work, and for you in being you. Thank you.